first pick in this Big Ten power ranking draft, I got to go with the Ohio State Buckeyes, the team that Cam covers. And it's not just that this team is seemingly loaded at almost every position. It may have upgraded at quarterback with Will Howard. It added Quinshon Judkins at running back. It added Caleb Downs to that defense. And it's clearly a team that has spent more than $20 million in NIL to try to get back to the top of the Big Ten and get top Michigan. But it's how many guys came back. And it's how veteran this team is across the board. Like when you think about what Michigan did the last 3 years and how they eventually got over the hump to win a national championship, you think about all the guys that stayed and didn't go pro, and you had the ridiculous depth of last year's team. And that's what I see from this Ohio State team. It's going to be just, this is a team again with the COVID years. You've got guys that are like 22 years old on this team in some situation, guys who are going to play a lot. So I think Ohio State's the favorite for the Big Ten. I think they're my favorite to win the national championship as we enter the season. But Cam, as our resident Ohio State guy, what do you think about this team? And is it national championship or bust for the fan base? Is that what they're thinking?
Yeah, I think it's for fan base and the players. I mean, Denzel Burke has been pretty open about saying that. It's just 1 year where Ohio State really isn't shying away from the expectation. Like they usually go up to Indy and just say they want to focus on themselves and certain things. But I think they know that it's national championship or bust with how things went this offseason. And I think it's reality. I mean, like you said, this team is always had talent, but it's the guys that are coming back: Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, Denzel Burke, Lathan Ransom, Emeka Buka, Trayvon Henderson. Like there's just so many guys who should be in the NFL right now that are back for another year. Then you add in the newcomers. I mean, Quinshon Judkins might be one of the best, might be the best running back in football. Caleb Downs might be the best defensive secondary player in football. So you just add so much other stuff to it. Then you bring in Chip Kelly. It's just the expectations are high. I think it's reality. There are some questions. The offensive line, I think they did upgrade with Will Howard over Kyle McCord, but the offensive line is still a question as well. So, but I think they are probably if not the most talented team in the country, second right behind Georgia. So I think it's a fair spot for them at number one.
Cam, you're a big college football 25 guy. Have you seen the Quinshon Judkins spin move in that game?
I have. I played a friend of mine like the first day it came out and saw it firsthand, and I was like, I don't ever want to play this guy again. I was like, if Judkins is half as good in real life as he is in this video game, how is he going to run away with the national championship?
Yeah. And last thing on Ohio State here, Jeremiah Smith, a lot of hype. What do we think? Is he going to live up to that hype? Fall camp's getting underway here. Is that going to be the dude?
Yeah. He's a dude. Everything you see on social media is like you see a clip and you're like, oh man, that's crazy. But he does it every day. Like it's to the point where like Ohio State players and coaches are like, that's just who he is. Right? Denzel Burke said that he said already his favorite player to go against the practice is Jeremiah Smith because he's that good. I mean, Denzel Burke's a potential first round pick next year, so he's a real deal. I think he's going to have to, and the coaching staff is going to have to calm down the hype a little bit because he's probably going to start August 31st against Akron. And if he doesn't get 100 yards, people are going to be like, well, what's going on? Like they're going to have to calm down the hype a little bit, but he is a dude, man. He's something special.
Scott, what do you think about the Buckeyes?
Oh, they're number one to me. They're number one in the Big Ten. They're number one in the country right now. Their defense is top shelf. It's probably the best in the country. And as you said, they're bringing back all these players. And I think what you're seeing and what we're going to see as trending in the transfer portal is it's kind of NFL and philosophy where Ohio State, Iowa's this way, Michigan was there that way before. And that is sign your own guys, make your own guys feel wanted. They're going to come back rather than being a 6th or 7th round draft pick, or in some cases a higher one. They'd rather come back for good money and bring that national title back to that town, or bring back, have a great season and return and maybe get better and put yourself in a better position. And I look at the Buckeyes, and I don't know that I've seen a solid 1-2 punch like this in a long, long time. Maybe Felix Jones and Darren McFadden come to mind. I mean, Judkins and and Travion Henderson are just unbelievable. In fact, I think Judkins might be, right now he might be my Heisman guy at the end of the year. So, and Jeremiah Smith, I mean, we looked at the last 4 to 5 years of Ohio State wide receivers from Garrett Wilson and Jackson Smith and Jigba and Chris Olave and Jamison Williams before he transferred. And then, of course, the best one that I've ever seen in the Big Ten, and Marvin Harrison. And Ibuka is in that category, not quite Harrison, but Jeremiah Smith might be in that category when it's all said and done. So the only question I have, two small ones, offensive line, can it be better? Those running backs are going to make them look really good in most games, but when they get against, they do have a maybe as difficult of a schedule in the Big Ten as there is, because they're going to be playing Oregon, Penn State, both on the road. They play Iowa at home and Michigan at home. Nebraska should be pretty decent this year, I think. So they've got a challenging schedule, and one or two of those teams is going to give them some issues. So can that offensive line coalesce and protect Will Howard, who I expect to probably be the starter? And two, will Will Howard take his game to the next level? He was really good at Kansas State, but at Ohio State, you got to be great. You got to win national titles. So there's going to be some pressure there. And of course, I like Julian Sayin. I just don't know that he's ready for that role even if he looks the part.
Yeah. All right, number 2 in the draft, Cam, you've got the pick.
Yeah. I think my pick's pretty easy. I'm going to go Oregon. I'm glad I had the second pick. I didn't have to choose between Ohio State and Oregon. I love Dan Lanning. I think he's a fantastic coach. I think you get a chance to pair him with Dillon Gabriel, who, like I think Scott mentioned, Quinshon Judkins as a Heisman guy. I think Dillon Gabriel is that guy for me. I think with that receiving core and with Dan Lanning and with everything that Oregon does on offense, I think they're poised to be the best offense in the Big Ten and maybe even the country. And I think it's going to be very hard for Oregon, for teams in the Big Ten to slow them down. I think they may run into some trouble when it comes to traveling out to the Big Ten in those win 3 months. I mean, I think they go to Wisconsin in November. They go to Michigan. So, like, those will be tough games, especially if the defense hasn't figured some things out by then. Because you can't just throw when you're in the Big Ten. You're going to and especially in November when you're going to Wisconsin and Michigan. That's a little more difficult. But I trust Dan Lanning. I think they'll figure it out. And by then they should know they should have a pretty good identity on both sides of the ball. But that team is loaded. Speed, athleticism, experience. I think they are, but I think they're easily the second best team in the Big Ten. I think we talk about all these teams being added to the Big Ten. You talk about Ohio State maybe being 1 or 2 in the country right now. I think Oregon's right behind them. So they should be a preseason top 3 team in the country for me.
Oregon's an interesting place under Dan Lanning in that they are recruiting extremely well. They've got really good teams. But for 2 years, he couldn't get past Washington.
Yeah.
They kept losing close games to Washington. And if you take out that game, and if you take out the first game against Georgia, I don't know if they've lost another game otherwise. Like they've beaten everybody that they've needed to beat. They just haven't won those big games under Dan Lanning yet. That's what they need to do. That's what getting Ohio State at home is. That's what going to Wisconsin is. That's what going to Michigan is. It's what having Washington at the end of the year is. I think he lost to Oregon State one time too. So like, that's what we need to see out of Dan Lanning. You like everything else that they've got. They can put the team together. Can they win the big game? And I know he got a lot of flack because of the Washington games. He'd go for these 4th downs late in the game to try to secure it. I was at the Washington-Oregon game in Seattle last year. They fail on 4th down. Washington ends up winning the game because Oregon misses a field goal late. So like, he's aggressive, and I think he's making the right calls in these games. They're just not going his way. And at some point, they're going to start to go his way. And this feels like a team where that could happen, but there's a lot of those games on the schedule where you're going to have to do that for the first time. Scott, what do you think?
I'm there with you guys. I mean, I look at Oregon is right there with Ohio State and Georgia as the most talented teams in the country. Dillon Gabriel, grabbing him at quarterback was really a strong move for this, after losing Bo Nix. I like getting Evan Stewart. I think he's a talent, and if they can develop him, he's going to be he's going to replace, what Troy Franklin brought last year. But probably what I like the most about Oregon, and this is maybe how they've evolved from what they were maybe 10 years ago to now, is they're a line of scrimmage team. They can line up and play slam ball along the line of scrimmage, both sides. And so that's going to behoove them and help them when they move into the Big Ten. And they're facing teams that, do have that power play. And we saw that in their first championship game, the first college football playoff championship game when Ohio State played Oregon and Marcus Mariota was there. It was just line of scrimmage football that Ohio State was so much better than Oregon. I think that has changed. I think Dan Lanning and you've got to give credit, to before him too with Mario Cristobal. I think he started to develop that, and Dan has taken to another level. And whether or not they win at something big, the good thing with them is with this expanded playoff that let's say that they win every game except against Ohio State, and then they get to the championship game, they lose again to Ohio State. They still have an opportunity to probably host a game in the playoff and advance and show that they're capable of that. So I like them at number 2. I think it's clear right now. Now at the end of the year, we'll see. They do have, again, going on the road to Michigan and Wisconsin in November presents challenges, and not just weather related. When you're playing those teams, even if you're a good team, going on the road in the Big Ten is not easy. For them going across the country into the Eastern time zone with Michigan or at Madison, you're going to face, a hostile environment and crowd. And there aren't very many of those were in the Pac-12 versus the Big Ten. And you're going to face a motivated team that'll really play hard, especially on the defensive side. So, but that said, talent-wise, they are just a shade behind the Buckeyes in my eyes.
Yeah, I mean, Evan Stewart is the player I'm watching on this team. Like, we know Dillon Gabriel's a solid quarterback. As long as he can stay healthy, he has battled some injuries from time to time, and you hope he can. But Evan Stewart, a former top 5 overall recruit, Texas A&M, lightning speed. This guy is incredibly fast, and you like the idea of him getting into that Will Stein offense and what they've got there at Oregon. So he's a player I'm watching. Cam, anybody else on this team specifically that you're looking at?
No, I think we covered it. I think Scott makes a good point that the question for a lot of the former Pac-12 teams coming to the Big Ten is like, can you hold up front against the Big Ten? Because like we talked about, you get into those November months, you're not just slinging the ball around. It's one of the things that I even C.J. Stroud talked about a lot. It was like wanting to get to Indy so we can throw the ball indoors, and I think that's why he's having so much success in Houston. But Oregon is one of those Pac-12 teams that comes here and it's loaded up front. Like, they are ready to go in the trenches. So I think that will help their transition to Big Ten. I think that's why you can consider them one of the favorites, because they are already built that way. They're already kind of built like a Big Ten team.